All right, I'm super excited to take a look here at Mazes. This is a fantasy role-playing reforged, a modern take on the classic fantasy dungeon RPG. With a single polyhedral die and the power of your imagination, can you defeat the maze controller with swords, sorcery, and shadow? Lightning fast and easy to master, Mazes returns us to the dungeons where we first battled dragons with an award-winning, unique approach to fantasy role-playing. Open the door to adventure if you are brave enough. This is published by Ninth Level Games, who was kind enough to send me this copy of Mazes. And indeed, as you open it up, you see there is a door. And the whole concept of this system is that you are walking into, you're opening up, stepping into the classic stepping into an adventure. I will say a couple things at the outset of this video for those of you who are my longtime viewers or who know what this channel is about. This is not a solo rule set. This is designed for basically a GM, what's called the maze controller, and one or more players. So that's the first thing. Number two, it is, I think, eminently soloable, which is why I'm talking about it on the channel, and the video is going to kind of focus on the ways to do that, and I think what is needed to do that, and why you might investigate the system as a foundation for solo play. And number three, there are some things about the system that I found to be problematic that I just did not do, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So with those points out of the way, let's take a look and see what this actually is. And the bottom line is that the basic concept of this game is that you have a character, and your character is only ever going to roll one type of die, really one die. With advantage, they may roll two, or they could re-roll one, but they're going to be only ever rolling a d6 if they are the d6 character. Or if they are the d8 character, it's a totally different type of character, they're only ever going to be rolling the d8. And you get successes or failures for the various things that you do based on what you are rolling. So if you are doing, for example, a books test, you are going to be having a success on a 2 or a 3. That will be the case whether you are a character like this one, the Paragon, who only has a d4 to roll, or whether you're the Sentinel character, which is the strongest character, at least in terms of protecting and fighting and things like that, which is going to be rolling a different die. That's going to be rolling the d10. They are still going to have the success just on the 2 or the 3. But obviously it's harder to roll a 2 or a 3 on a d10 than it is on a d4. So this books test is going to be harder for the character that is the class that is more the kind of fighting, protecting class than the class that is the one that's more investigating and thinking. So without a ton of math, without a ton of fistful of dice and tons of different dice, it's a very elegant way of directing the characters and giving certain characters a more likelihood of doing something than not. Nevertheless, everybody can attempt to roll for anything, except, for example, with the Paragon character, they're never going to be able to roll bones because you need to roll between a 5 and a 9 for that type of test. So that is the basis of the system, and you can see here what the 4 roles, ROLES, are defined as based on the 4 types of die. So your roll is your roll. A little confusing, a little bit clever, but it does form a basis for a game that is very simple and almost intuitive in a way. I find that I have played this as the DM for some kids, and it was super useful because with kids, you know, you get like, this is your dice, this is your die, that's no one else's. This is yours, it's no one else's. And also just visually to see that these are different characters and the dice are different characters. Super useful. And I think for adults, obviously, that can be useful as well. So if you want to take an action, you are rolling your die and you're determining whether it is successful based on the kind of action and based on whether you get to that roll or not. If you want to save, it's kind of the same situation, but you're doing that to avoid something that the GM or the maze controller is throwing at you. Now, in this game, the maze controller never rolls dice. It's completely player facing, which is why I think it's so easy to modify it for solo play. Effect is another way of rolling or deciding what the impact of something is. So like, for example, the damage that you might be doing if you are in combat, for example. I mentioned advantage and disadvantage. So if you have advantage for something, which you can have based on things that are generic to your character or a situation, you're going to succeed if either of the two rolls that you make succeeds. But if you have disadvantage, you can only succeed if two die rolls are going to be successful. So with disadvantage, you would need to attain a success on both die to have it count as a success. The types of actions are described as follows. So a book's action is like something to do with knowledge or perception maybe, and that's where the D4 is the best at rolling that. The boots is like dexterity, movement, running, things of that nature. Blades is fighting, basically, and bones is kind of more like resisting pain or disease, or it's your overall strength and endurance. It's slightly different than fighting, although can be somewhat related to it. And then there's the concept of the key and the crown. So the key is if you roll a 1, and it is something that you would normally be able to do. So if you are a witch and you're trying to cast a spell and you roll a 1, you get a success. That's a bonus on that. The crown is the highest value of your die. So a crown for a D8 is going to be rolling the 8. And for a D6 is rolling a 6, etc. So this is going to be either giving you a success or not, depending on the state of the game. And the state of the game is controlled by something called darkness. And darkness is one of the things that the maze controller sets, but again, as a soloist, pretty easy to sort of proxy these rules. And as things get worse, basically, the darkness level is going to rise. And as the darkness level rises, it will impact whether or not you can do certain things. So there's a tracker that you can have or create if you're not using the worksheets here to track what darkness is. So you can see here the little description of what it means, the rising darkness. So it's not just a resource, it's the barometer of danger and a way of providing pacing and control to the story. So if something is bright, a 1, 2, 3 or darkness, basically everything is good. And so if you roll a crown on your die, you're always going to succeed. Things are easy, things are safe. 4, 5, 6, this is kind of like torchlit. This is kind of like the standard, basically, way of starting an adventure. You don't get a disadvantage or a disadvantage if you're rolling a crown. You have the ability to spend stars, or basically like power points, to effectively sort of re-roll or do something great. You are allowed to spend those if it's torchlit. And then if it's 7 or more, things are bleak. And things are bleak. If you're going to roll your crown, you're going to always have a failure. So when you are rolling, you're disadvantaged there. So this is a way of just increasing essentially like the threat level of the system, of the world that you're in. In addition to the role of the character, there's something called an aspect, and this is the way your character is going to approach the world. So it's basically like dividing up the character types, and there is the sword aspect, and you can answer your questions here about your character, how you approach problems in the world as basically like a fighter might. And then there are different types of characters that we'll look at in a moment that are specific to the sword aspect. There's a shadow aspect, which is like maybe like a thief kind of character, or maybe like a rogue, something that is somewhat, as it would suggest, in the shadows. And then there's the sorcery aspect. So magicians, we have like a haunted librarian here, or an alchemist. So these are further ways to flesh out the character, and you are given, in doing that, various edges that go with the character. And when you are defining the character with edges, it's like an adjective to, it's a very narrative way of building a character. And if you are making a roll and using something that is in line with one of your edges, you can roll with advantage. That's basically the way these all work. And you can see they're listed here, and then they're described. Charming, you could be a shapeshifter, you could have friends, like connections and things that you can, that will allow you to move through the world in an easier fashion. And they are listed here, and it's like something about who the character is, something intrinsic to the character. And so you could see that in building the character, you're doing this through actual language more so than any type of numerical stats, because again, you're only operating with the die that you have and the very static chart here that's going to tell you what is going to be a success or a failure on that. But your attributes, your edges and things are going to allow you to mitigate those rolls by rolling, making certain rolls with advantage, or giving you the benefit of the doubt on certain types of things. There's a magic in this game, of course. Well, here we get to character creation, and it's laid out very clearly. If it starts on page 78 of the book, after going through part of the explanation, but not all of it. But it walks you very much through a series of questions about your character. So why do you want to engage in this adventure? How are you going to solve your problems? What is your place in the world? And that answer is going to be the class, and that's going to give you your first edge. Who are you in the world? And you get your second edges that way. So you could see this narrative creation of characters is very much in tune, I think, with something that could work for a solo experience, almost like a journaling experience. So, well, what are you? Well, I'm a seeker of knowledge and glory. Then you're going to be a paragon. I want to stay in the heart of the action. You're going to be a vanguard. I'm here to fight. That's it. My sword. I'm a fighter. Or I'm here to keep everyone safe. I am a sentinel. And then it says once you have your character class, you're going to get some other things that will allow your character to specialize, and you're going to fall into the sword, shadow, or sorcery class, as we already discussed. And then you have, it's kind of repetitive information, but the classes are listed out here with the specific types of characters. So, for example, you might be a filthy urchin, and you have these attributes. The filthy urchin is always quiet as a penniless beggar. Are you streetwise or dexterous? So you would choose one or the other. Are you agile, fast, or keen? You would choose another edge. So you would end up creating a character using those words. And then we're given a more detailed list of the classes. Of course, you could always make your own, but here, for example, to stick with that filthy urchin, you're going to get a little description more of what they are and like what they might do or how they might be in an adventure with a party. You even get names for them, and you get equipment. So equipment in this game is just assumed to be had. It is assumed that you have what you need to perform the tasks that you would do as your character, whether that is equipment like a weapon or equipment like a series of lockpicks. There are, for the magic users, however, there are actual spells delineated. So there are different domains of magic and then spells that go with those domains. So you don't need to just invent all of that. That is here in the game itself. And also useful for the soloist is this grimoire of the actual spells here and what they do and what their domains are and the impact of the spells. So you can choose that from here, or you could make up your own, but it's nice to have the specifics, and it goes on for quite a few pages here. And then you get information. A lot of the information in this book is kind of repeated in different ways. You get here the spells by the school and the different lineages, and it's broken down that way. Toward the back of the book, it's called a Book of Hazards, but it is essentially like enemies that you might encounter. There's an example monster of how you could make your own here, and quite a few pages they're not numbered, so if you wanted to create a random table, you would need to do that for yourself, perhaps breaking them up by how difficult they were, but there's quite a few of them, and that's really useful to have lightning wisps and a jagged troll. There's an ocean drinker who's elite, huge, terrifying, and a marquee character, maybe like a boss here. So quite a few things here in the Book of Hazards. There's swirling death, that is a trap. And then in part 6, on what came before, it says, being rules for the translation of the esoteric rules and formulae of game wizards and dungeon cartographers that have come before us. There are a very clearly delineated way of translating resources from OSR into this game, and how to do that for all different types of OSR materials. And I think that could be very useful to players. What I have skipped over here is a rule that I found counterintuitive and just not to my taste, which is this rule about treasure. So you are meant to start the game with a certain amount of treasure, and you are meant to have the danger level match the treasure level. The danger level could increase for other reasons, but so for example, if you start with 3 characters and every character has 1 piece of treasure, the danger level is going to be 3. Treasure is totally abstract, and it is meant to be used almost as a currency in a game to exchange with or give to the maze controller if you want something to happen, if you want to be able to do something, or you want some sort of benefit to happen. I didn't like this at all for just a ton of reasons. I think just conceptually it makes no sense for characters who are delving into mazes to get treasure to then use it as a currency to give it away. So I didn't like it for that reason. And I just found the whole thing to be confusing. So I did not use that at all, and I sort of skipped over that explanation of what that is here in the book because I didn't use that. But it does go to something I do want to talk about with the book, this little section on the maze controller here, that in the way this is described is that the maze controller is kind of opposing the characters. And, you know, if you know anything about sort of the history of RPGs, that's not really traditionally what the GM is meant to do per se. But in this game, it is explicitly described that way in multiple places. And that's just, you know, something to bear in mind, where there's some sort of negotiation that sometimes is meant to happen, where you're, again, like exchanging treasure with a maze controller to make a task easier or something like that. But that said, this is a great system because, as it says, that it's really designed for the most part for one-shots to start in the middle of the action to just kind of get going into doing something. And yet, in this particular book, the something that you will be doing is not defined. And the reason that I'm not bringing you an example of my own gameplay with this, which I did do, is because I brought in so many supplemental materials that I own to kind of make it work, to create the environment, to create NPCs, to give my character something to do, that I didn't think it would be particularly useful to show on the channel because it just worked based on the things that I had. But that said, I think this is a really interesting traditional system to get if you want to make your own solo session out of material that's not necessarily designed for solo. Again, the concept of just using the different polyhedrals to represent the whole thing about the character makes it super clean and super easy to, if you have, these are going to be 3 different characters. So if you are having a party of 3 and say you're just trying to have everybody try to do something, you can roll, well, I roll 2 ones there. You could just roll 3 dice at once and then kind of evaluate them. And it allows for playing larger parties as the soloist without like a ton of things to do. Well, you can't see this guy at all, without a ton of things to do and manage. And I think for solo play, it can be challenging to run more than one character. So I really like this piece of mazes, and the way the resolution works, I think, is great. The encroaching darkness and the impact it has on what die rolls may or may not give benefit, I think, is also great. And for solo play, you can just manage how that increases by as you go through obstacles. Each time you do something, it can increase. Each time you have a combat encounter, it increase. And things like that to kind of push your story along to some type of conclusion. And I think for a one-shot solo play, having that built into the rules is really useful because it takes some of the guesswork away from you. Again, caveat, to play this effectively, I think it needs supplemental material, whether that's random tables to give you sort of dungeons to go through, or if you're doing exterior exploration, some type of wilderness thing, I think you're going to need to bring something else to it because that it doesn't have that in here. But if you are looking for an elegant, sort of simple rule set with some depth to it to modify for solo play, I think this is a great thing to check out. And